So welcome to the Bleeding Keyboard. With me today, I have got the Queen of Filth, Dani Brown. Dani, which genre do you write in, and how do you define that genre?
Oh, I'm known for doing extreme horror with torture porn. I'm known for doing bizarro, and I'm also somewhat known for doing more experimental stuff that it's a bit horror, a bit bizarro, and brings in a bit of erotica.
Could you, for those like me who don't know the term, what's bizarro?
It's I think the best way to describe it is a B movie, but in book form.
That sounds like a thing of beauty. Yeah. So with extreme horror, yeah, how do you define extreme horror? Is this something?
Well, it's something if you were to film it, it would be illegal and rightfully so. Is the best way of saying when something becomes extreme. And with I know there's a lot of debate over what's extreme horror and what's splatterpunk. So sometimes, like, although splatterpunk may have some political commentary or something, extreme horror may have some of that, but it could just be a gore fest for the sake of it being gory and disgusting and pushing human limits of tastefulness and
But that's never a bad thing, is it? That's sort of like giving readers what they want, and
yeah,
that's also um, yeah, exploring and stretching boundaries of what we can read and what we can tolerate.
yeah, that's basically what extreme horror does.
Brilliant stuff. Then yeah. So what's your writing schedule?
My writing schedule, I started work full time 6 months ago. Before that I was freelancing and had a little business. So right now it's I wake up at 5:30 and write a little bit in the mornings before work. I'm a single mother, so I have a 13-year-old son. So I can't write in the evenings
Right.
because my child needs attention.
Yeah.
Um, and then I write on the weekends. So just basically whenever I get a chance. Before I managed to get this job that I've wanted, the whole reason I went to university was to get a job in marketing or advertising. So before I got this job, I was dependent on what work was. I was, and the people around me, just nobody likes a single mother. Nobody thinks that a single mother can look after herself and know what she needs to do to get where she wants. So sometimes there'd be a lot of drama around me, and my family is just awful, awful, highly dramatic people to begin with. And there'd be those people. So I had my family, and then I have people like my family and my son's school teachers. Oh, you've got to do this. And they'd stress me out too much to be able to accept any freelance work, because you accept freelance work and you can't complete it, you get blacklisted basically.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'd have horrible, horrible jobs that would often leave me feeling suicidal. So I would wake up at 5. So I'd have to bring my son to school at 6:30 to get to work on time, or wake my son up at 6:30 to get to work on time. And I'd spend that hour and a half having breakfast and just writing and writing and writing just to get out of that situation. And at 5 a.m., there's no one around to say, oh, you need to work in McDonald's, you need to leave. This was like when my son was 5 and 6 years old. They're like, and I have no one, no childcare, no access to childcare whatsoever. And they're like, basically, you have to work in McDonald's, you have to work in a supermarket and stuff. I'm like, with those schedules, you're telling me I have to leave my 5, 6-year-old, 7-year-old home alone.
Yeah.
So it's like, and that was coming from his school teacher, some of that, and it just didn't click in their head that they're basically, I'm not sure if it's legal to leave your 5 or 6-year-old home, but to
I
me it
don't think
does
it is.
sound like child neglect. And
That must put an awful lot of pressure on you and your creativity, though. The fact that you've got all of these outside forces sort of like telling you exactly what to do. When
yeah,
you do get the chance to be creative, how easy is it to switch off that external stuff so that you can focus?
it depends, because obviously with a child, and he's a clumsy child, I have had to I've had phone calls when he's been at school and he's broken his arm and stuff. So I have to keep my phone on. But what I do is I try and keep as many of the apps switched off as possible because, yeah, that's the real life people. Guess what? People like that also exist online.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to get back into a situation where I'm dealing with other people's problems and other people's stuff instead of my own. Like, yeah, if somebody has a problem that I have the time to help them with and I actually can help them with, and this has only come up a few times where I've actually been in a position where I could help somebody, I do help them. But sometimes if you're going to offer your help to somebody and interfere in their life, you can make their problems a lot worse. And some of these people, their problems are either so complex or so made up that they need professional help.
Fully with you. Fully with you. So yeah, right. So on the subject of writing, which is most important to you? Is it plot or is it character?
Definitely character. I have written a story with no plot.
Oh, hark at Virginia Woolf sitting there. So yeah, why did you write one without a plot?
I was heavily pregnant at the time, and because I was pregnant, I couldn't do my master's degree, but my friend was doing his master's degree, and he's like, here, I found this list of writing rules that you're not meant to break. Do you want to try and break these? And I had this idea going back years and years, based on my mother was an awful cook. Like, shall we say, it was so bad that when my brother had appendicitis, we thought he had food poisoning from her because he had eaten her cooking. And she used to overboil like frozen vegetables. So I had this idea for like the broccoli, because it falls apart if you cook it for like 2 hours in a pan of boiling water, just coming out of like your pores on your skin. And I tried writing that in third person. Then I tried writing it in first person, and I still had the idea, but I couldn't quite get it to work. And my friend sent me this list of writing rules. He's like, here, try this, but break them. Don't follow them, break them, every single one. So, and that's what I did. And that eventually became broccoli.
And that's kind of an interesting thing. It's one of the things I've picked up on my PhD. As writers, I think we are all bloody minded. So if somebody sort of like says, this is a rule and you can't break it, most of us just go, hold my fucking beer. Yeah, and
Yeah.
like go in there. So yeah, a list of writing rules that you're not meant to break. I'm going to have to look out for that because that looks like...
Yeah, there's quite a few of them floating about, and I unfortunately lost the original list he sent me. But it had stuff like, don't write a story in second person, don't start it with the character waking up. So of course, if it's in second person, then the character wakes up.
But you know, and this is going off on a tangent, but I'm allowed to because, yeah. I was once telling students, don't write something in second person because I can't stand second person. And since I'm marking it, you're not going to get a good mark. And this one student who was bloody minded said, right, yeah, submitted something that was in second person. And it was the most exquisite piece of writing I have seen. She'd managed to frame it in a choose your own adventure style of way. And yeah, it just really, it wouldn't have worked as anything other than that. And I had to give it a very high mark, which it absolutely deserved. And
if you can pull off second person, it does come out well. But if you can't pull it off, then it is quite...
it's part of me as a reader. And again, it goes back to that whole bloody minded thing where if I'm reading something and it says, you are walking down the street, my first thought is, I'm sitting here on my fucking chair. I'm not walking down the street at all. Yeah. So, right. So we are definitely on character then. So what piece of writing advice would you give to anybody who's just starting out?
If somebody's stopping you from writing, regardless of whether they're a friend or a family member, then they don't really care about you, and do your best to get away from them.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think as writers, we need support and we need structure. Excuse me, I've got a cough. Yeah, we need that support around us, don't we? I'm in the very fortunate position of I'm married to somebody who's who edits for me and reads through things and gives me honest critical feedback. But yeah, being in a situation with people that tell you no,
yeah,
that would. So yeah, if someone's stopping you, yeah, absolutely agree. Who do you read for pleasure, Dani?
I lately I've been reading a lot of Clive Barker when I had time to read. I'm hoping in a few weeks when I finish these 2 books I have to finish, to at least read 1 or 2 books before I get back into. I have been working before I started my new job. I have been working on a version of Snow White, and before I get back to finishing that, I'm hoping to at least read 1 book.
Well, if it's a Clive Barker book, in that case, it's going to be damn good because yeah, the guy can't do anything wrong. He's absolutely brilliant. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you call yourself the Queen of Filth, and I appreciate this is a tongue-in-cheek epithet, but is it fair to say that audiences associate erotic content with filth?
Yes, I didn't come up with the name. It was an ex-boyfriend that created the name, and he tried to create. I guess I still get stuff that comes back to me years later that he created a whole fictionalized version of me, who evidently has a lot of fun, and not what I would describe as fun, but if you're into that sort of thing. But Drew over at Godless has been calling me Queenie, so I've been using Queenie instead lately, although I still have the logo. But yes, and a lot of my early stuff, before I was published, a lot of it had high erotic content. Because like when I was at uni, I was always told, if you're struggling to let people know who you are, just let them know the opposite of who you are. So I'm like, well, so I started with this character, a male character with very, very sexually fluid, very, very promiscuous, because I was the extreme opposite of who I was.
Right.
So, and it just took off from there. So I usually have a little bit of that characters in a lot of what I write.
What an interesting perspective then. So that's writing from the perspective of somebody who's the opposite to who you are.
Yeah.
Does that allow a feeling of liberation, or does that allow you to sort of like approach subjects that you would otherwise not want to touch?
Yeah, it definitely has. So, and it does do a lot of things I wouldn't normally touch. Like if it was just me writing me, I just write very juvenile, very funny, gross out stories, because I'm very, very squeamish, and originally I was training as a doctor. So and it was originally in pathology, too much body fluids there, and I fainted. So I switched to epidemiology, but there's still no escape from the body fluids and stuff. So I'm that squeamish. And this was when I was in my teens. So if I was just writing without being told that, if I'm struggling, because I was always such a very private person growing up, and the lecturer told me if I'm struggling, just write the opposite. But if it was just me writing, it would just be all really gross out stuff.
So yeah, that makes sense from that perspective then, that you're somebody who is squeamish and finds all the body fluid stuff a bit for want of a better phrasing it. And yeah, so you're writing it so that you can upset everybody else with that.
Yes, everybody should experience what I feel like. Even as I say, my child is clumsy, very, very clumsy. So there's been lots of cuts and scrapes and bruises, and you don't bring your child to the hospital unless they're really badly hurt. So I'm the one who has to clean. Well, he's old enough to clean them himself now, but when he was little, I'd have to clean his scraped knees and get the gravel out and stuff, and it was just gross.
Yeah, I completely get that.
And then, of course, it was my genius idea to use cloth nappies. So I'm the one who had to wash these nappies every day.
Yeah, that's not a genius idea, that one.
But he toilet trained quickly.
Again, just to go back to the what we were saying before. So do you find, because of the erotic content you've created, a lot of readers find it difficult to disassociate the author from the content?
Yes, they do, and it's quite scary. I hadn't experienced it until moving to Liverpool. Like when I lived in America, it always seemed a very American thing. Like if you because I had always been very, very good at art. So I'd always draw and stuff. And people would try and read too much into what I was drawing. And I have friends who would write stories and stuff. Like I didn't start writing fiction until I was in my early 20s.
Right.
And it always seemed very American that people would project whatever you've come up with and think, oh, that's who you are.
Yeah.
And when I would try and get help for my mother, I would sometimes experience it down south where people would project that onto me. But not to the extent so when I moved to Liverpool and people thought that, oh, because you're writing stuff with highly erotic and highly violent content, this is who you are as a person. And I'm like, certainly not. But they won't take no for an answer because they're all these armchair psychologists and they like to think they're very intelligent, and they really sound, if you've ever seen Pink Flamingos, there's this speech that Divine gives at the end, and they just kind of remind me of that. I'm like, when are you going to go eat the dog shit? Please go eat the dog shit.
But it's true, we're not what we write, are we? I mean, not the last one, earlier this year, I published one about serial killers, not because I'm a serial killer, not because I like serial killers, but because the horror content in it lent itself to this whole notion of something that I personally found horrific, and I wanted to share a creepy story. And I think I remember seeing many years ago an interview with James Herbert where somebody was talking to him saying, he said he'd received some fan mail from somebody saying, oh, you've written this saucy scene in this, you must be a particularly saucy person. And the guy interviewing said, so they forget all about the rats eating the person in the scene before. And all of the we just get this, don't we? We get
yes, it's constant.
But
as a woman and as a lone woman, I won't go out anymore because I get grabbed at and stuff. I don't know how much of that is what the character my ex created and wanted me to be, or how much of it is from my writing. But it's really quite scary.
I mean, as a cisgendered white male, I'm in the very privileged position of I don't have to worry about things like that for me.
No.
But yeah, that must be bloody awful. So how do you achieve then the balance between erotic fiction and horror fiction, since both are trying to provoke conflicting responses from your readers?
How do I achieve it? Or
how do you achieve that balance?
I think I do that less in my fiction and more my more experimental stuff, where I'm more playing with the words and the feel of the piece rather than worrying what the character's actually doing.
Right.
So I really pulled it off in 56 seconds, which is unfortunately out of print right now, but it will be back. I'm aiming for January. I'm just waiting to get its sister back. But I told the publisher who has its sister story becoming, just hold on to it for now, because I'm not quite ready because I have too much to do.
But yeah, I think that balance is when it works, the way you do it and make it effective is kind of a powerful thing, because it's going between, I'm reading something where I really want these characters to carry on enjoying it, and then it moves into the horror side where I really want this to stop as quickly as possible. Yes. The balance of narrative tension is just such a challenge. But
Clive Barker's the master at doing that.
Yeah, he is, isn't he?
Yeah, obviously I do read a lot of him. So
but yeah, I think we should all aim to be more Clive Barker. Have you got an ideal reader?
Not particularly. Like sometimes when I'm writing something like what I'm writing now, it's just a very silly story. It's called 30 to 50 Feral Hogs versus the Big Bad Unicorn. It features a former prime minister who evidently had a thing for pigs, after he's received surgery to have his dick basically transplanted to his head, and he's going on holiday to the United States where feral hogs genuinely are a problem. And he's going to go enjoy himself. And when I'm writing that, I'm thinking teenage boys are going to like this one.
Yes.
But when I'm writing my more weirder stuff, I'm not really thinking, because when you start getting my bizarro stuff like Sparky and like Ghetto Super Skank, those are both crossovers to, I'm still in the genre fiction, but I'm about to move more over towards prose poetry. So I don't really have the audience picture, but once I'm in the prose poetry, although I'm surprised the way 56 Seconds did, like how well it did within the horror community, because that was prose poetry, but people who read it there was a lot of horror fans it appealed to, and they really liked it.
I'm not surprised. And when you said that the story about the former PM would appeal to teenage boys, that would appeal to me as well, because I remember when that news story hit the headlines, I was just laughing for a week. Yeah.
Yes, I still find it amusing, but like my fairy tales have taken on. I know it started with the Midnight Pumpkin Fucker, and that was more focused on the mafia rather than prime ministers. But once it hit the Snow Queen, and just with all the sorry about my cat, she's 17 years old, and I don't like to disturb her too much, but it started with the Snow Queen, and because she's manufacturing cocaine, and you're just thinking about all the places in Parliament where it's testing positive for coke. I'm thinking, how many of these prime ministers that we've had have been on some form of drugs? And I have particular hatred for David Cameron and Tony Blair. So usually, if I'm mentioning a prime minister, it's one of those two. Like, I lived in the United States through the bulk of Thatcher, never experienced John Major. So those two are kind of off limits because I don't have that firsthand experience. Like, I was really young when we moved to America, so I don't remember Thatcher at all. We just experienced what is potentially her legacy still.
Yeah.
You know, John Major could have tried to fix it. Tony Blair could have tried to fix it. David Cameron and the coalition could have tried to fix it. The closest we got was poor Theresa May inheriting this giant mess, trying to do what she could, but she had Brexit on top of it, and then so it's
I'm absolutely with you there. I want
to it's too soon to write about Boris.
He ends up in a lot of my poetry, but that's just because I usually go for cheap laughs with my poetry. And he's an ideal target for that. We mentioned before we came on here, talking about universities only giving advice of only writing what you know. I think we're both in agreement that that's not particularly good ideas.
No, that's not very good. It's like, if you're going to write what you know, write it in your journal. You know, by all means, write what you know and sell that. And sometimes that does well. I guess Harry Potter, when she wasn't ripping off Lord of the Rings and Narnia and God knows what else, I guess she was writing herself into it with her points of view and her depression and stuff. And that sold remarkably well. It's a beloved film franchise. People have had, upon discovering what her views actually are, people have reacted quite negatively to it. So, you know, that it can work very well, but that's not the only way to do it at all. And as somebody who's writing commercially and writing for an audience, if you're saying the only way to write is to write what you know, then that's quite dangerous for me for a start, because I'm not really writing what I know. Like, you know, I don't know what it's like to have relations with a feral pig. I don't know. You know, I often write from a male point of view. I don't know what it's like to be a man.
I think, I mean, I agree with the advice of write what you know, as in make sure that you've researched it, make sure that you've
Yeah.
given it lots of consideration and thought, but limit it only to the world that you know. That just seems incredibly limited. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't get why that would be given out as advice. But
No,
yeah,
and it's, if you are going to give out that advice, just, tell people there are other ways that writers write. Like, I doubt Stephen King's done everything in his books. But no, I grew up in New England, so I've seen the meme where it says, "We thought Stephen King made it up." No, he hasn't. New England is a very strange and creepy place. But he also writes about all these monsters, and you've got the Man in Black and stuff. The Man in Black isn't Stephen King, nor is he the gunslinger who pursues him through the desert.
exactly. And Stephen King, although he must have done an awful lot of things in his life, I doubt that he really unearthed a spaceship in his backyard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Or met up with a clown that was dancing through the sewers. Yeah.
that is it. That is New England, though. It wouldn't surprise me if there is somebody in a clown suit dancing through the sewers there. So it's a very weird place, and everything's haunted. But it's, Stephen King sells obviously remarkably well. He's often in the bestsellers list, but none of this is real. It's all make believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dani, my final question is to you. What are you currently working on, and where can we find more of your work?
What am I currently working on right now? Well, in a few minutes after I go feed my pigeons, I am going to be working on 30 to 50 feral hogs versus the big bad unicorn. It is quite fun to write. Obviously, it's kind of based on the Three Little Pigs, but he's not going to huff and puff and blow down the house. He's going to huff, he's going to puff, and he's going to blow his load. So I'm currently working on that. I'm hoping to have that done for an October release.
Excellent.
And then I am working on my Scumbags 2 story at the same time, so I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about that.
Will that be for Godless?
What?
Is that for Godless?
Yeah.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah, so you can definitely find my work on Godless if I've self-published it or republished it after it was with a publisher. And you can also find my work on Amazon, and I honestly don't know what distributors my publishers have, so I'm not involved in that side of things. But when I'm self-publishing, I always put it on Godless, and I may or may not put it on Amazon.
I will put links down below so that people can find you and learn more about all the fun things that you're writing about. Dani, thank you so much for your time there. That's much appreciated.
You're welcome.